what problem is the business looking to solve? At the heart of it, that's the question I'm asking.
Yes.
I'm asking the business to articulate what specific problem, what is the pain point that they want to address. And so tech is coming in to be able to do that. So it's never tech for the sake of tech. And if I've been pulled in to work on a project that is say to sort of roll out a new ERP solution, right? I'll still go through that process of understanding where is the pain point and why do we need an ERP solution. So that journey needs to happen. So whether that is a framework for me or not, to me, it's a principle. It's something that I always lead with. Where organizations struggle with, they usually know the pain point. They know the pain point that they want to solve for, right? Sometimes they understand that the process also needs to be changed, right? What they struggle with is the fact that they think bringing in a tool is going to essentially take away all these problems. We need an ERP solution, and that's going to fix these 10 issues that we have. Let's bring in that ERP solution.
We make mistakes.
We learn.
We grow.
We share.
Shamelessly.
This is Shameless Tuesdays,
the digital transformation podcast brought to you by Transformation Leader.
Welcome, Shameless family. Welcome to Shameless Tuesdays. And today we've got an amazing guest, Timothy Laku, straight out of Kenya, right?
Yes, Nairobi, Kenya.
Nairobi, Kenya. And I'm absolutely excited to have this discussion because we're going to be talking about why digital transformation looks different in Africa, the cultural dynamics that shape technology adoption. And personally, I've experienced this. I've seen it. It is painful at times. And I mean, I personally think this is probably one of the most important conversations to have on this podcast. And we're going to be talking really and diving into digital transformation, but not just the technology, the adoption piece, because adoption is really the heart of what we're trying to get to, where the impact lies. We are talking about why the same technology works in different cultures, but it might not work in one culture versus the other, and what we need to do in order to be able to make technology work from one space to the other. Why system that transforms a company in Silicon Valley can collapse in a company in Lagos, in Nairobi, in Harare. And all of these places might have some nuances that we really need to be cognizant about in order for us to be able to maximize sort of that adoption. But more about our guest, Timothy. Our guest, Timothy, has delivered 100 plus digital transformation projects across Africa. He does not apply a Western framework. Rather, he looks to contextualize the problem for the context of the problem and then adopts a solution that works for that. He has built frameworks that start with an African organization at the heart of it. And at the end of the day, he has become a thought leader within this space, working across multiple different continents. And actually, I think next week or in a couple of weeks from now, he might even be in Zambia. So I might be able to meet him up. And having conversations like this is incredibly important, or I find it exciting. So, Timothy, I've done a disservice to a lot of the things that you've done and the journey that you've walked. I was just giving an introduction to you, but there's no other better person to do it than yourself. So please, if you could just add on to what I've just talked about, give the audience a bit about yourself so that we can appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Actually, you're not wrong. You have actually hit all the pointers there. So you're actually right.
No, I refuse. You've done a book. Scaling impact. You've done a global AI speaker. I could go on. 30 plus organizations, 100 million people. Come on, Timothy, give me more.
I know the list is long. But I think one of the pieces that I'm really proud of is authoring this book that is called Scaling Impact. And it's essentially a distillation of my 20 years across the continent, working in the tech space. While I work in the tech space, I don't see myself as a tech person per se, right? I see myself as someone who's championing what tech can do in society. And so when I engage and interact with different organizations or different people in different countries, the lens that I'm bringing into the frame or the angle that I'm bringing into the conversation is essentially to be able to say, our context is different. In Kenya, our context is different from Uganda. Our context is different from Tanzania. And across Africa, something that works in Kenya doesn't necessarily work in Nigeria. Something that works in Nigeria doesn't necessarily work in South Africa. Because again, the context in that situation is completely different. So, my presence there is to reframe how tech can be leveraged in that context to be able to scale and to impact. And for me, impact is number one. There's no point of having tech for the sake of tech, right? It's got to be able to do something. So for a business, bring in more revenue, increase your customer base, allow you to be able to scale. Amazing. That's the impact component. If you're thinking about healthcare at the grassroots level, how can we reach more people? We've got 1.5 billion people across the continent. Not all of them can access modern medicine from towns. So do we just forget about them? No. Can technology help us to reach the many people within that country with healthcare services? Yes, right. And so that's kind of the lens I'm bringing in. Just question the status quo and say, let's think about this a bit differently. Let's go beyond where we've reached in terms of what technology can actually do.
And so that's fascinating, because across the different contexts, and obviously having delivered over 100 plus transformation projects across Africa, my first question to you then is around frameworks. How, and you talked about the context. So do you walk in with a checklist? That boom, 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 and you say, bang, fill this out, then we're good, and then I'll come back and I'll fix it? Or how does that framework look for you? And is it very prescriptive, or is it very like 1, 2, 3, or is there some nuances associated to that framework that you do use, if you use a framework?
So for me, I look at them in terms of principles, and not necessarily in terms of frameworks. So at the heart of the work that I do when I'm engaging with an institution or an organization is to ask the question, what is the end goal? At the end of the day, what do you want to achieve when we do this project? I'm probably been called in to work on a project, right? So what's the end goal for you? So for a business, usually the end goal is all of those business outcomes. A business is struggling with growth. They want to be able to go beyond maybe a city where they're actually established to 3 more cities. Okay, they want to be able to scale. So for them, the end goal is to scale. Another business would be, okay, our number one problem is that we are not making enough money, and we want to be able to make more money. And so we want to look at revenue and see how we can increase. And so the opportunity there is, can we bring in tech to be able to grow that revenue? Another organization is working in a very regulatory heavy, like the financial sector, right? You're heavily regulated. There's so many things you have to keep checking. So there's the risk of non-compliance. And so the pain point there for that business is essentially to address the risk of non-compliance. They get fined when they don't comply. Can technology help that organization be compliant? The answer is yes, right? So the first question, which essentially is the goal of what the business wants to achieve when they're thinking about technology, is essentially, what problem is the business looking to solve? At the heart of it, that's the question I'm asking, right?
Yes.
I'm asking the business to articulate what specific problem, what is the pain point that they want to address. And so tech is coming in to be able to do that. So it's never tech for the sake of tech. And if I've been pulled in to work on a project that is say to sort of roll out a new ERP solution, right? I'll still go through that process of understanding where is the pain point and why do we need an ERP solution. So that journey needs to happen. So whether that is a framework for me or not, to me, it's a principle. It's something that I always lead with. The other second thing in that conversation is about the people, right? So while all of this is happening, what are we saying about the people in the organization? That conversation needs to be part of this. So we're doing transformation, yes. We're bringing in a new tool, yes. We've understood what the pain point is, yes. but what are we doing about the people? Like that needs to be part of the conversation. So we are not going to move with, this is the problem that we need to address. Now this is the tool that we need to bring it into that, and package it into this whole entire transformation journey. And then we are forgetting our people. That for me is unacceptable. So I'll pull in the conversation around what happens to our people through this journey. We're starting with this group of people. Halfway through, do we need to hire more people? When we are finishing this, what's happening there with the people component of it? The third one is about obviously the process of it in terms of whether the organization has thought through the implication of process and how enterprises are big. You can have a division with like 300 people, mining 9,000 people. There are many people involved in pushing this enterprise forward. And so there's implication in terms of if you change a process in finance, what that actually means for the operations team, what actually that means for the procurement team, and there's a ripple effect across the board, right? And so the implication of connecting those dots and having those conversations before anything actually happens is an important one to have, right? And so but at the base of it, that's kind of how I'm looking at it. I'm looking at it from the fact that what's the pain point here? 2, have we involved our people? And by our people, I mean everybody who works in that organization and every other stakeholder that is actually involved with the output of the organization in terms of impact and then in terms of understanding what the process might look like in terms of the implication of changing anything along that chain because of this journey. And then it's a journey, just managing expectations, right? It's a journey. It's not something that happens tomorrow. This thing is going to continue and there are phases to it. And so are we managing the expectations right going forward?
And so then my question then across the three, right? The problem, the people, and the process. What would you then say people or businesses tend to struggle with? I mean, of the three, are they equally weighted in terms of what you find where you spend most of your time?
So from experience and from a lot of the last 20 years of engaging with organizations, where organizations struggle with, they usually know the pain point. They know the pain point that they want to solve for, right? Sometimes they understand that the process also needs to be changed, right? What they struggle with is the fact that they think bringing in a tool is going to essentially take away all these problems. we need an ERP solution, and that's going to fix these 10 issues that we have. So let's bring in that ERP solution. So they're looking to the tool as the savior of the day. But the reality on the ground is that the tool is not the answer.
Listen, I got a question. How then, where does the technology sit across those three? Because, I mean, you talked about the problem, the people, and the process, but there's nothing about the technology. So where does the technology sit in? Because I love that and it's driven by, we forget about the people, we forget about the process, and we think by implementing a technology, somehow that
miraculously everything is sorted.
Everything else, right?
That's so tech comes last. This is how I say it, right? Tech comes last. In the early days of my career, tech used to come first. Obviously, I was still novice. I'm still learning this thing. I'm leading with the technology. I am trying to understand how that all works. A couple of failures down the road, projects that started that took 2 years instead of 3 months, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm navigating this early on. So 20 years ago when I started, I was leading with tech. 20 years later, I am more mature, right? I understand that leading with tech is disastrous, right? To be fair, maybe 5 years later, I started realizing that this thing is not going to work if we're leading with tech because nothing actually shifts. So it's problem fast, right? Problem fast. And sometimes, this is interesting statistics. 9 out of 10 of the times that you engage with an organization who's asking you to bring in technology and leading with technology, after going through this exercise with them, they realize that their technology is not the problem. What they have is actually enough. What they need to work on, though, is everything else. It's the people, it's the process, it's the governance around it. That is most of the time where the problem actually exists. And it's very hard for them to come to that conclusion where, I've been brought in to basically upgrade or bring in a new ERP solution. And then after having conversations through discovery, I'm telling them the reality of this is that if you tweak these 3 processes, you don't need to change the current technology that you have. What you have is sufficient. Very difficult to swallow.
So I'm gonna give you an example, then I'm gonna ask you to give me an example, something similar, right? So literally, it comes in through the door like, Baba, we've got this new technology and it's gonna solve our problems. And so we had incredible issues associated to training. A large group of people came forward, proposed an idea, the technology. They said we need to integrate, and they show you all the fancy PowerPoints and they show you everything that you need to show. And then they're like, as long as we implement this, all your problems are gone. Then you go in and then you and the implementation starts. So I sort of arrive halfway through the implementation. You realize that you've bolted on to a process that doesn't work, a really good technology, but replacing also a really good technology. And really, you've blamed the last technology for a process problem. And then the whole problem becomes about trying to unbundle this idea that the solution is in the technology and not the process that supports the technology. And it was for me, it was incredibly difficult because you almost had to step back, unwind to then move forward, because the foundation of what we were building off of was completely divorced of a process that was sustainable and or scalable. And I'm curious to understand, like, have you had some instances like that when you're deploying, whether it's across countries or, and I'd love to hear a story.
Yeah, most definitely. There's a classic example of an organization in Ghana that I was working with a couple of years back. They are in the Agri-Tech space. And so this would essentially be an organization that is working with farmers, right? Last mile farmers, also at the same time engaging with customers at the, urban centers, town centers, ordering fruits and vegetables. So the platform was essentially to be able to allow you and me, who's sitting in our offices, to be able to go in and order a box of fruits, a box of vegetables, right? And in the back end, they'd be able to pull that information or to be able to connect to their logistics network and be able to access and grab all of these fruits and vegetables from the different farmers, right? And if at the front end level, it's understood that when I make an order, I want to be able to get my order within a few hours. If you order fruits and vegetables, for example, you want to be able to get that within literally a few hours. But the logistics of getting that from a farmer who's 100 kilometers away, 200 kilometers away, right? That practicality of it is almost impossible, because there's picking it from where they are, putting it in the van, the truck, moving it from there to one center where all of these things are put together, packaging that, right? And then putting that in smaller vehicles and then getting that to your house or to your office, right? How can you do that literally within hours? It's almost impossible to do that within hours, right? Right. So practically that probably will take a day or two, given how that logistics chain is actually designed. Now, one solution could be, let's put in a logistics management system to be able to connect us faster with those centers and our HQ warehouse where everything is put, right? Or we could basically think about, how do we get the fruits to the warehouse faster? Forget the technology, the process.
Yes,
right? The process itself. How do we get fruits physically from the farmer all the way to our distribution centers or to a warehouse faster? With or without the technology, you still have to fix the process. You still have to fix the process. Right? and so coming in and being asked to be able to implement a logistics management system as the technology that should be addressing this was irrelevant at this point. So this is a classic case where the tech is not the solution. The process is the one that needs to be improved. You only layer in the tech to be able to make that process better. And without an existing process, what are you going to improve, right? And so that was a very difficult conversation with the Ghana team to be able to say, no, the solution to this is not what you brought me here to fix. We need to fix the process, right? Let's address that. Let's walk through the process and understand and optimize it physically before we bring in a solution or a technology to come in to be able to help. So that's a
That's
classic
interesting.
one. And this happens all the time.
Yeah, now that's brilliant. And so then I've got then a question associated to organizations and culture. So we talked about, as an example, Silicon Valley, where you can maybe eliminate some level of hierarchy, where you've got these flex structures and beanbags and, all these things that build Silicon Valley culture, right? Whatever that means. But at the end of it all, when you then try to adopt and transition a digital transformation project within an African context, have you ever found that the hierarchical nature of organizations within African context has either worked for you or worked against you? And is that actually a moment where those big international companies might get it wrong when they do come to an African context?
Yes. There is a classic example of a startup that came to Nairobi a couple of years ago. And this startup was essentially, it's a food tech startup. They're in the food sector, right? They've created the infrastructure at the back to be able to package this low-cost food in a small package. So there's your what we call ugali here. Then there's the carbohydrate there. There's a bit of a fruit, a vegetable, and it's a protein, right? And they've optimized the back end in such a way that plate that you order is as cheap as they believe needs to be for a typical Kenyan, in Nairobi. The problem they were solving for is they said that cheap food, not cheap, but affordable food was not accessible in Nairobi. Like that was not a thing. And so what they were doing is basically fill a gap that, as a local person in Nairobi, knew that gap never existed. I can walk out of my house and walk into the street and I'll find this open, quote unquote, restaurant. And I'll buy whatever I need to do at the lowest, cheapest, most affordable. For me, when I walk out of the street, I could access that.
And you enjoy it as well.
And I would enjoy it as well. The food was there. It was accessible. It was affordable. But you see someone coming in from France and then coming to say that in Nairobi, food was not affordable, and so they were filling a gap that never really existed. They did not understand the context of where we eat, how we eat, and at how much in terms of cost or pricing we're paying for that particular food. And so that was a disconnect. They ran maybe for about a year or two and they closed down.
Wow.
Another startup came and they said that they were going to connect merchants across the country, connect different small shops across the countries. If you travel out of Nairobi, or I'm sure the same thing in Zambia as well, as you leave the urban centers, you find these small kiosks and shops, right? Selling small pieces, one sachet of oil here, salt, water, like those small shops. They existed, and there's so many of those shops across Kenya. And so what they wanted to do was essentially to find a mechanism to order and use those shops as distribution centers, right?
Okay.
And so I am living in a rural 300-400 kilometer away place from Nairobi. I make an order on this app, right, for something that needed to come from Nairobi, right? And then it will be delivered to the closest shop near to me, and then I'll have to go there and pick it up.
On paper, it sounds like
the idea is amazing. The idea is amazing. The idea is amazing. The problem here is not everybody has a smartphone. The other problem here is not everybody can afford to pay 5G unlimited internet.
Yes.
That's the other one, right? And so, and for the majority of the people out in those remote areas, not everybody speaks English, right? So those are constraints that are uniquely African in such a way that, well, that idea works in a different country where 5G is ubiquitous, access to internet is ubiquitous across the country, to smartphones are affordable across the country, right? That idea would definitely thrive outside of Africa. But in Africa, 95% of our peri-urban, rural environments do not have stable internet connectivity. Not the majority of the people can't afford a smartphone, right? These smartphones are too expensive. They have the usual dumb phones that they normally use. And so building a startup idea that assumes that the majority of people in Kenya use smartphones, have access to unlimited internet, and have access to unlimited connectivity in terms of the telecom infrastructure, that's a big assumption. And the reason why that startup failed is because they did not contextualize the solution that they were bringing in the context of Kenya. Again, another classic example there where context really does matter.
And so then another thing, which is a question I have, is around trust. Because again, trust is something that fundamentally, usually, not even culturally, anyway, you go, it's about trust. Am I going to really trust this idea that is really is very divorced to what I'm used to? I mean, a food tech company offering me food that I can walk outside. There's also an element of trust that I'm like, no, why would I do, like, it doesn't make sense. What's your take around trust and digital transformation?
So the way I look at trust is essentially so one, if you contextualize what it is that you're doing, you're closer to addressing the trust problem, right? A lot of the reasons why the customers that we want to engage with as startups, for example, we are not connecting with them because we do not understand their context, we do not understand their culture, we don't speak their language, we do not look like them. There's that component as well, and that's very important since we've had and seen stories of founders who are coming in from the West or from the global North, and they are pushing this idea and a solution down, and instead of using people who look like us at the community level, they try to be the ones leading the conversation, and that usually just breaks, right? At that point, no one is understanding what it is that is going on because you haven't lived their reality. You've got to live their reality and then be able to relate with them at that level for them to be able to understand or to be able to embrace what it is that you're bringing, right? And so that's one. That piece is always going to be a problem. The other one is not involving the community or the customer or the people that are going to be part of this transformation journey. Basically, been packaged in the boardroom. It's been designed in such a way it's complete by people who do not have that context of that community, and then you're bringing it when it's already done, and then you're trying to push it down the community. They will by default not trust. The solution to this is essentially to involve the community from day one, right? If I'm trying to solve for the food, quote unquote, problem in Nairobi, I'll come have a conversation with the street vendors, involve myself with all of those shops, restaurants, right, that are out here in the different streets, talk to them, ask them, what's the issue? How can we work together? Where do you feel like if I bring in technology, it's going to improve what it is that you're doing? Hear from them, engage with them at that particular level. And then now when you come back with a solution, the trust issue is gone, right? You've addressed it through the conversation because you've co-created this thing with them. And then it's easier to actually do this. And the same thing works across enterprise, works across organizations and companies as well. Co-create with your people, involve them through that journey, have those conversations with them very early on throughout the process, and not necessarily when a strategy has been formulated. And then you're coming back and saying, this is our grand strategy for the next 5 years. These are the 10 things you're going to be doing. And everybody is seeing it for the first time.
No, hold on. Okay, I hear you 100% on that. Now, I'm going to try to touch into AI here because I want to really lean into this idea. And I don't trust AI. I don't trust it for nothing. It's a still image that you took of me and suddenly it's moving. These are lies. These are things that I don't understand. Like, we bring in technology that really redefines how I see the world. How do I write a simple sentence and then suddenly out on the other side, this really complex answer comes out of? The idea of AI fundamentally is not trustworthy. So how on earth am I going to be able to listen to you? How am I going to be able to adopt this crazy idea that starts at, look at this, boom, boom, magic. You've lost me. You lost me at the point. And then you say, you want to just accept these T's and C's, press accept so that it can look at you and nah. So for me, whether a business owner, whether it's in a private space, that whole idea of AI and trust now then opens up a different conversation. I'm very curious to understand how then do you adopt and transform a business, especially within this modern AI era, when this stuff is just borderline magic.
Exactly. So this is interesting. This is how I usually approach this. Let's go back to, I don't know whether your grandparents are still alive.
Yes. Yeah.
Imagine the first time that they spoke with you on this mobile phone. What was their reaction?
Witchcraft.
Exactly.
This is crazy. How on earth is this possible?
And that was only voice. And then when Zoom came, and then you could virtually from a different country be able to speak with them, and they're like, "Where are you?" I'm in the US, and they're in Africa somewhere. Like they're like looking at you, looking at your kids, your environment, and it's again same thing. I mean, what I'm saying is that we've been there before. We've been there before with many of these past technologies. The internet in itself was magic when it first came.
Yes.
The fact that you are able to access information, chat with someone, send someone an email, they respond to it immediately. If all you knew was the post office, and then suddenly I can send you a message, you see it immediately, and then you respond. And literally within minutes, I have a response, right? Someone who understood the post office and the letter, which took weeks, right? Is like, what is this? This is some crazy magic, right? Like that's been the history of tech. And throughout, you know, the evolution of technology over the last 100, 200 years, nothing has changed. Think about the person who was using a horse, and then suddenly there's a car with 4 tires, and it's moving. And it's moving. They're like, wait, what? This thing is not alive. It doesn't breathe. It doesn't eat, and it's moving. Like, what is that about? And so AI is not any different. AI is not any different.
Timothy, okay, fine. I don't disagree. It's not any different. But for me to be able to make those moves, for me to be able to also innovate within the space, for me to be able to have the courage to step forward and go forward, there's a level of, I have to draw from strength from somewhere. I have to draw trust from somewhere. And sorry, there are examples historically where these sort of events have been, you know, people unknowingly have been conned, or, you know, certain things have happened because you were too trusting into a process that nobody really understood or appreciated. So for me, I still think that piece for trust, you've got to give me more than a car and a horse. You got to give me more than that. I understand your point.
I completely agree. The fact that any tool that we have in front of us has the ability to do good and to do bad. We have no control over that. And this is the way I see it, right? The internet, people use it for everything negative and wrong. The internet today, the people who are using it for all the positive and the good vibes, like all of that is happening. So it is just a tool. It is just a tool in itself. It doesn't do anything until another human being gets it to do something. And so for me, when it comes to AI, I am an optimist. I look at it from the positive, because with every tech, historically, what has actually happened is those who actually looked at the technology from an optimistic perspective are the ones who eventually sort of took it up, ran with it, and built something of impact out of it, right? The Googles of this world came from the very early people who were like, you know what, we could do something with this. The social medias of this world, the Facebooks and the likes, it's the very early adopters who are like, hey, what can we do now that we have this platform? Can we use it to connect people? And so think about doing that in a positive way. It's the same thing that I see with AI as well. I'd rather we are more optimistic than pessimistic with any new technology. The bad things will happen. Yes. It doesn't mean that bad things are not going to happen. But if you're leaning towards being an optimist, you start to think about how you can leverage this tool to help your people, to help your community, to be able to help your company. That to me, in terms of if that becomes good, you scale that. You're able to magnify that. And that for me is better than having to think about it. I'm not going to touch it because something wrong could actually happen. And so for 10 years, the people who said they're not going to be part of the internet revolution or part of the mobile revolution, where are they today? Like they're regretting the fact that they didn't actually go with it. So I would lean towards being optimistic, even if it's not perfect, because history has shown us that anything that is not perfect becomes better with time. I'd rather lean towards being optimistic with that. And so I can benefit or essentially leverage those positives and build something that is positive for society.
And then I've got a question associated to that. And I'd love to hear it from an AI adoption, AI deployment, AI point of view. And that's the concept of the scaling. So, and it's a paradox for me. It is, in order for you to be AI enabled, there's a lot of back-end stuff and pre-stuff that one has to do. But we see this really fancy end goal, and then we try to skip all this other stuff. And so my question to you is around, is that a paradox in reality for scaling, or can we just jump into the end and just deploy on an enterprise level? Or are there things that we have to do that then future-proof you for that scalability?
Yeah. It's like building a house. Think about building an apartment that is 5 floors, right? If you don't have the foundation in place, you will build that house, but it will collapse. You will be able to build the floors, but you probably will not reach 5th floor, right? You probably do 2 floors and the building is going to collapse because the foundation doesn't exist. It's impossible to scale without addressing the foundational elements that are needed to be there for you to be able to scale. So even in the AI age, right, if your data is siloed, that's the foundation. You need to be able to make sure that it's integrated. If you don't even collect data in the first place, that's the foundation. There's nothing you're going to build. There's nothing to build. If you haven't digitized any of your processes, right, you're not doing that in a digital way so that you have data points where you can pull all of this information and start to think about insights and then start to ask AI to tell us where are we, where do we need to improve. If those processes haven't been digitized, there's nothing you can do there, right? Like so those foundational elements need to be able to exist beyond just having digitized and digitalized, right? All of your systems integrated. Are those systems talking to each other? Because you could have a CRM here, customer relationship management system that is used by the sales team that doesn't talk to your enterprise resource planning solution that your finance and procurement and operations team is using, which is not talking to the guys at legal. They have their own system that is completely independent, right? You haven't done the integrations of these systems together into one place. You still are not even ready to layer AI on top of it. For business value, you can use AI for productivity for your team, right? Throw in an Excel sheet there with data and say, give me a summary of this and give me some insights. That can be done. So the productivity elements of AI, you can still leverage. But driving business value using AI, those foundational layers need to exist. Without those, it's impossible.
And so I then wonder, and I'll use the example of the siloed conversation. So integrated data, even the collection of data, right? Sometimes you come across the concept of cybersecurity or governance or regulatory. You know, there are things that sometimes result in fundamentally the structure of the business being incredibly disjointed. Does that have to change in order for us to become more productive? Is that going to change over time? Because over time, things just naturally have to move in a certain way. Or do you feel that you can find ways around it, whether it's through encryption or some other means of getting an integrated layer to still get you value as an end, as for an end user and a problem that you're trying to solve for?
Yeah. So the integration can be done in many ways, and tech can solve for that. But there's an aspect of governance that technology still cannot solve for. Who's making the decision within the organization? Why are they making that decision? How are they working together? When we need to implement something within the organization, let's say credit scoring, for example, who's responsible for ensuring that the output of that is aligned with some of the principles of that organization? For example, if you're a bank and you run a credit scoring model that ends up giving loans to men and denying loans to women, the data that you have is biased towards men because most of the data that you currently have within your system that you're training this LLM on is essentially men. And so when that model has been created and someone throws in their request for a loan, it will by default deny women the loan, even if they are qualified, right? who's watching that piece? Who's making sure that bias within that decision making is actually, sort of catered for? And that's all within the realm of governance. That's not for technology. That is a governance conversation that the organization needs to be able to kind of sit down and talk about that. And so to answer your question, yes, you can bring in tools, you can bring in tech to support with integration, but you can't run away from having a conversation as an organization around governance. What does that actually look like? What's the role of everyone here within the, say, senior leadership team, within the organization as a function, who's responsible for this credit scoring AI solution that we're bringing on board? And then how are we going to engage and whom do we need to engage with, right? So the governance conversation still needs to be at front and center before anything actually happens. So while tech comes in for integration, the governance piece is a whole operating model conversation for the organization.
But then how then do you maximize or drive that transformation? Because surely that governance could prohibit. I mean, are there ways of working through whether it is developing the right level of or the right type of governance, not restrictive or constrictive, but rather governance that is supportive but also serves the function of serving for the business but also protecting the business?
Exactly. So this is a leadership conversation. And that's where it needs to start. So the organization has the CEO, the CFO. It's got the ExCo. It's got the board looking at it in terms of what are the priorities, what are the objectives for this business over the next couple of years, right? So at a strategy level, it's a leadership conversation. So the governance conversation is not a technology conversation, but a leadership conversation. And so instead of starting on a project like a proof of concept, for example, for an organization, the right path of having this conversation is to start at the board level, have that conversation with the board. They are in alignment, come down to the ExCo level, have that conversation at the leadership level. They are in alignment, and then let the leader of the organization own this project and have this conversation with the rest of the organization. So it's where who's leading this conversation. I think that's what matters. And so the person coming in and implementing shouldn't be the one leading this conversation. It should be the CEO of the organization after having stakeholder meetings with the ExCo and the board, be able to say, I own this and this is how we are running with it, right? So that is important. That is important. So when I talk about governance, I'm talking about it from a leadership perspective.
Fully understand. So I am then very curious to understand from a digital transformational space, if you were to then advise somebody, that one action that come Wednesday, they should do, and a small step or a big step, and they should practice doing, what would that one or two things be for us to have then that action towards an impact?
So it does depend. If you're starting out and this is the beginning of your journey, the first thing you want to do is have a conversation with your team around what's the biggest pain point that our organization is experiencing. So going back to what we spoke about earlier around, for me, the principles, right? What's the biggest pain, right? And so that's the conversation to have. If you're already executing on the transformation roadmap, if you're halfway through there, the question that you need to ask is, what does the governance structure look like around this project? So that's the immediate thing, because if you haven't already answered the question of problem, then probably you want to go back there. My assumption is that you already have identified the problem for the business, and hence why we're doing this transformation conversation, and this is where we are on the roadmap. So the question at that point is, look at governance. How does that look like? What's the structure? Where could it be improved? Where are the gaps, right? Have that conversation. That's the right conversation to have at that particular point in time. If you're going towards the end of the transformation journey, the question to ask there is, have we brought our people with us? And if we haven't, then we need to involve our people more. Because before that journey ends, if you haven't addressed the people question, then it's going to fail because you haven't addressed the people question. So before you close it out, think about what does that actually mean for the people. So it does depend on where you are in that journey and what you get to do in terms of an action. Those would be the three areas I would say look at.
So I think that's amazing because that really resonates with the quote of the episode. And the quote of today's episode is, the important thing is not to stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing. And why I feel that was so important, and I'll start with the fact that you talked about the actions, is that conversation with your team is to understand where you sit with regards to your principles, have that conjoined or that collaborative approach towards the digital transformational space. And that is the first step of curiosity, is being able to hear other people's thoughts, to contribute and co-create, as you said earlier. The other side of that is the governance structure, because at the end of it all, if you do not have the right governance, you don't have the right vision culturally and how you intend to deploy this, then you start to see significant gaps, or you haven't necessarily looked through the different elements of it. And for me, whilst you are trying to transform, and as you're trying to transform something, it is important to be able to question everything. And it's important to be able to have that curiosity to be able to question something and everything, to be able to give a better product, and to be able to not necessarily lead with the technology, but rather to understand the context of where you're going to infuse the technology within. And then about your people, I could not agree more. And without the level of curiosity, you will never be able to understand the people that are in your team, the people within the organization, and what the people require and how you need to be able to get them through towards adopting something that's different. Your first answer associated to frameworks for me was interesting, because you really swiveled the whole conversation over through to principles. And for me, the principles are very simple in that they are overarching regardless of where you are and where you come from. And the problem, the people, and the process. And I'm like, wait, but you didn't even say technology. And then the digital transformation conversation. And really, when you then go forward and you give those examples of the tech, the food tech startup and the distribution startup, where both of those led with a large part the technology, forgot about the context and forgot about the lived experience, and really the idea that people might not have smartphones, data is not necessarily easily available or expensive, or a whole myriad of issues that, a technology and a solution might look fantastic, but when you come to deploy it, you completely miss the mark because you have not thought about the principles at the heart of what you're trying to achieve. Fine, you might have the problems, but the principles of the process and the people become the collective triage for me that really drive what is going to necessarily change and transform what this digital space looks like. And then we talk about trust. And for me, the concept of trust is so important. That whole thing of a shared and a lived experience, the whole thing of being able to embrace somebody else's reality from a point of where you truly understand what they're talking about, and not necessarily embracing it from the papers of a boardroom, whiteboard, that we're going to unpack this and we're going to do this and then we're going to deploy it. And really, there's no involvement for co-creation. And that's why that third action for me really sews in really nicely to what you talked about earlier, because that's a fundamental part of how we gain trust. And people are the custodians of that trust. If we don't have people, we don't have trust, we don't have business or a solution to solve. But then we dove into my favorite topic, AI and the witchcraft, magicry, wizardry of witchcraft. And quite frankly, you make a very solid idea, the point that this has been our past. This has always been a revolving door, where we had cars and horses, and we had phones and video calls, and everyone is constantly changing and evolving, and technology has been at the heart of it. And so we shouldn't necessarily look at this as anything more different, but rather this is a continuation of what we've seen before. And where we are right now is testament to the fact that we will and we should probably carry an optimistic lens towards it all. But over and beyond that, it's about, if you don't have the foundations in place, you might find that a large portion of what we are working towards, it will crumble, and it might not deliver upon the promises that we would have then talked about. It might then shatter some of the trust that you're probably building because you've not necessarily gone about it the right way. And And then we talked about scaling, the foundations being critical. And essentially, if you are siloed within your data, you're not collecting data, you're not digitized, you're not digital, and yes, you might be able to solve for productivity, but you won't necessarily transform the organization as a whole. And so you really need to really start breaking down some of these barriers, looking at it from an enterprise architecture point of view, and then looking to see how this whole thing works as a collective for us to be able to maximize and leverage the different units, the different data sets, and the different information. Personally, I found this very, very informative. And if anybody's going to take something from this, I'm going to say the 3 points that were put forward: converse, governance, and people. Those three end up giving you the right balance of you taking the first steps, but more importantly than anything else is delivering upon the potential, but also the impact that we're all looking to achieve. Timothy, thank you so much for articulating the story of an African leader that I guess is not necessarily talked about often enough. We talked about this earlier. Your organizational culture is not a barrier to innovation. And I think you really talked about a lot of those things, but really it should be the foundation of what we're trying to build from. And I'm really curious as to where people can find you. How can they hear more? Because we didn't have enough time. We could probably spend 2 days on this. But if you want to converse and continue the conversation, please, how can they get a hold of you?
So 3 ways: LinkedIn, Timothy Laku. That's where I post every other 2 days. So there's a lot of insights and information from across the continent. I'm actually now posting about something on AI as well. That's 1. 2, timothylaku.com, the website. So if you go to timothylaku.com, you will see a lot of my works in there. I blog around tech in Africa. So there's lots of stories there, use cases, insights, guides, very useful resources you can find on my website, timothylaku.com. And yeah, I think those are the 2 major ones.
Well, that's, I think for me, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Again, I'd like to just thank you so much for joining us today and sharing with us the amazing work that you're doing and the lots of insights that you have.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ziki.
This podcast is brought to you by Transformation Leader. You can follow us at www.t4leader.com.